Hello, I'm author and professional speaker Don Shaw, and I'd like to welcome you today to episode 19 of Friending the Mirror. Can you believe it's been 19 episodes? And they've all happened this year. Anyway, the title of today's episode is Social Construction of Discrimination. And my friend, actually she is my friend, but my guest today is Colleen Wheatley. Colleen has been a member of the facial difference community since she was born with a hemangioma. She became involved with the organization AboutFace, a charity which promotes awareness and education, as well as support for individuals affected by facial differences at a young age. Through her involvement, she was able to be supported by a larger community and began speaking as a representative of the facial difference community. Colleen continued to be engaged in experiential programming through her local clinic at the pediatric hospital in Toronto called Sick Kids and at the inception of Camp Trailblazers. She continued her education in family and social relations and in 2010 completed her Master's of Social Work from the University of Toronto, specializing in health and mental health. She has worked as a child protection worker and as a youth therapist. When she's not working, Colleen loves spending time with her nephews or skating with her roller derby team, the Death Track Dolls. Colleen, welcome to Friending the Mirror. I'm so happy to have you on with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really a pleasure to be here.
So I'm just going to launch right into my first question, and that is going to be, let's start off just talking a little bit about yourself. And let's just start. I mentioned that you had a hemangioma. Could you explain what a hemangioma is?
Sure. So I essentially explain a hemangioma in layman's terms. And essentially the way I see it is it's a benign tumor, so it's extra blood and fatty tissues, and mine happens to be on my face. So there's kind of a variety of hemangiomas, vascular malformations, and for me, I suppose it's an infantile hemangioma. So that meant it appeared as a small mark shortly after I was born, and then it kind of grew and took up kind of half of my cheek and was a darker color, and then it stopped growing. You know, a couple months in all honesty, I can't remember, and essentially I kind of it looks like it shrunk over time, but essentially I kind of grew into it, I guess, if that makes sense. So I usually just explain it as a birthmark because, you know, even though it wasn't there exactly the moment I was born, I can't remember not having it. And as you can see, it was there when I was a baby.
So yeah, sorry for being a little late to come in on that. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next slide because that's you when you're a little bit older.
Yeah.
If it will let me do that. There we go. Screen share is always entertaining. So anyway.
Yeah, so that shows it's a little bigger and a little poofier, and it is quite noticeable on my face. And that's me and my sister, Claire, my older sister, and then our dog Gus, and me rocking the fashion of socks and sandals.
Awesome. Yeah, the puppy's awfully cute. I figured you couldn't go wrong with a picture of two cute little kids holding a puppy.
Exactly.
Anyway, so what was it like for you growing up with a different face?
Well, I guess it's a hard question to answer because also for me, it was just growing up. You know, I did grow up in a small town, so a small community. I went to a school that was just up the street, so I was able to go, as I said, with my older sister. I was able to go with kids I grew up with, to my neighbors, that sort of thing. I think essentially I did know that I looked different. You know, I did know that when I went to the grocery store with my mom, And people, whether they were adults or other kids, would occasionally stop and stare because I looked different. So that was part of my experience growing up. I can remember when I was in kindergarten, we would draw, with a crayon, we draw a self-portrait. And so I remember in kindergarten realizing, I drew my little stick person and realizing, oh, I need a red crayon. I need a red crayon to draw my hemangioma onto my little stick person. So that's a little bit of what I can recall from growing up, but it was also just kind of life.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a pretty supportive family, you had friends. So it doesn't sound like, a lot of people have trouble with having a facial difference because they get treated differently, they get bullied. Did you have any of those experience?
Yeah, I did. I did have a few. I would say, yeah, like you said, I did have a very supportive family. I had, my parents are both teachers. So I would say they had a good knowledge of kids and kids' development, but also being realistic. So I would say I grew up quite protected. I had an older sister who was quite protective of me in a good way. My parents were quite strategic about a lot of things. So growing up, having kids over, or when I had friends, my parents would make a point of inviting those kids over to play at our house. And that was so that my parents could know, and that they knew, that my friends were treating me well, and my friends were actually treating me like a friend. They did lots of things, like, as you can see, my dad made a point. He always really enjoyed photography. So I always say that I was kind of trained from a young age to be very comfortable having my photo taken. And they always made a point that there were lots of photos of me throughout the house. So that was kind of, created a bit of positive reinforcement. And yes, there was a little bit of bullying, I would say, and I've spoken with other people, and when we're adults, a lot of us tend not to really be able to remember the details. And I'm not sure whether that means that, we don't think it was that significant, or maybe there could be like a protective factor in our memory saying, you know what, that's not really important. So I did have, I was a teenage girl. Teenage girls, we go through a period where we're really struggling about how we feel about ourselves and trying to fit in with others. And so that often means that we kind of try to put others down to make ourselves feel a little better. So, I would say, yes, I did experience some of that in the same way my peers did as well. There were some incidents of bullying, especially when a new kid came to school. And there were also a few times I can recall that I can remember being on the playground and saying, you can make fun of other parts of me, but you can't make fun of my face. That part is off limits to me. So, I think that also, when we think of bullying, we think of it being name calling, and we think of something that's very tangible. And I think that sometimes there are different forms of bullying that are less noticeable. I've sometimes used the term interpersonal aggression. And so what that really means is kind of leaving someone out. So that means that, if your friends are going to eat lunch at a table at lunchtime, maybe no one was going to be mean to me, but it was clear that they were eating at that table. So I would say there's milder forms that aren't necessarily recognizable. But yes, I will say overall, I did live in a very supportive community for sure.
Yeah, 'cause I was just going to add that I think a lot of people, when they think about bullying, they kind of forget that exclusion is a form of bullying. I mean,
A huge part.
yeah, even being chosen last for a sports team, like in physical education class, there were always the kids that were picked last, and it was
Mhm.
and they knew who they were going to be. And I mean, it's something, anything, and I don't want to say anything because that's a little too extreme, but generally something that is designed to make someone else feel bad. But a lot of times I think kids don't realize that what they're doing. I mean, they just, they're
Yeah,
making they're uncomfortable, like if like the exclusion factor.
for
Some
sure.
doing it to be mean, but I think a lot of times it's just, oh, well, we're just uncomfortable with that person.
Yeah, so people avoid things that make them uncomfortable, myself included.
Right. Yeah, exactly. What did I keep saying? Push your comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
So what I wanted to talk about next is actually the title of our program, which is The Social Construction of Discrimination.
Yes.
And when I saw you send that to me, it's like, that sounds really cool. Let's use it as a title. I have no idea what it means, but let's use it as a title. So I figured this would be a good time for you to explain, what does that mean?
Sure. And I guess I'll be honest, it's kind of an evolving theory for me, but I guess the way I see it is I do believe in the social construction of disability. So the way that kind of frames my world is that, you know, if houses or if buildings were built with ramps instead of stairs, then there wouldn't be an accessibility issue. You know, if we had other communication devices that were common practice, then again, with folks who need to use different forms of communication, a Dynavox, that sort of thing, it would be easier and more available and more accessible. Often, you know, it's cheaper, it uses less resources, uses less time to build a building with stairs instead of a ramp.
Something like that, because I would look at something like stairs or even a physical device. I would look at that more as like the construction, like actual physical construction. Now, what about, I mean, how does that fit into the social aspect?
Yeah, so that's the way is really if we did make a more accessible society, then there would be less you know, less barriers to folks with disabilities, that sort of thing. So the way I kind of see that is, you know, I have a facial difference, and I have, to be quite honest, struggled with kind of where do I fit in? You know, I remember applying for scholarships and that sort of thing and going, you know, does a facial difference count as a disability? Because it does impact how others engage with me and how I engage with other people. It doesn't necessarily, it's not a huge barrier for me in other aspects of my life. And you know, it is less tangible. So that's kind of the way that I see it, is there is a social construction of discrimination. So essentially we are taught to fear people who look different from us. And you know, that's not, that's a safety plan. That's something that happens to keep each other safe. So from a young age, you know, in fairy tales, in comic books, in Disney movies, and cartoons, and all of those things, we are taught that bad guys look different. Often bad guys have scars. Often bad guys, you know, have something that makes them look different. You know, like an example, as mentioned, I've got young nephews, and you know, they're able to tell me what the bad guy in Scooby-Doo looks like. They've never watched an episode of Scooby-Doo, but looking at pictures, they're able to see, oh, the bad guy looks bad. You know, and whether that means, you know, they have different skin color, or, you know, they've got raggy hair, some sort of different clothing, but they're able to recognize the good guys and the bad guys without having any other information. So that's essentially what I mean by the social construction of discrimination. And like I said, it's kind of an evolving theory of mine, but that essentially people are taught, and it's not necessarily that people know and people are conscious of it, because I have spoken with people, you know, I remember speaking with someone and they said, you know what, I remember meeting a cousin of mine who, you know, had been burned. And I remember being kind of scared of her when I was young. And I could tell talking that they were feeling guilty for something that had happened over 30 or 40 years ago. They were feeling really terrible that they hadn't treated this person, this relative, as an equal. And, you know, I was like, well, like, yeah, that's not okay, but it's also not your fault. That's what you were taught. You were taught to recognize when someone looks different, that means you've got to be cautious. So that's kind of what I mean. And when we see it in the media, when we see it in movies, it is really, once you stop and look at it, it is all over the place. And I know people will respond and say, well, no, but things have gotten better. I mean, look at Shrek, you know, and yes, things have gotten better for sure. But that doesn't mean that the issue is resolved. I'm going to say still the majority of times that I watch a movie or a horror movie and there's a bad guy, yeah, you can pick out who the bad guy is versus the good guys.
I kind of want to jump in because one of the comments that I kind of wanted, something that you made me think of when you mentioned it, is if there was a backstory, like I think one of the Batman movies, there's been a gazillion, so I don't know which one, they actually, yeah, the villain was scarred, but he had been through something. And of course, it was a story where that person had become bitter and angry.
Yeah.
And of course, that does happen. But I think one of the things we need to avoid, and one of the examples that we have to live, is that not everyone who has suffered a damaging injury, and I'm very evasive of the word disfigured and disfiguring, but it, you know, someone who has suffered that kind of damage that has changed their physical appearance so that they are different, they are going to be dealing with a lot of emotions. And if they have support and acceptance, they're going to be better people and they're not going to be villains. But I can certainly understand the idea. Unfortunately, Hollywood doesn't give you the backstory a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly. And right there goes that then the assumption is when you meet someone on the street, you assume that they have that awful backstory. And whether, you know, it's not necessarily conscious, but it's a subconscious thing that people aren't even aware of. It's natural.
Right. And I mean, one of the movies that I really object to is Hocus Pocus.
Mm-hmm.
Always been just, even, I mean, like decades ago, I was actually offended because there's the 3 bad witches or whatever, and one of them has a facial difference, and she's the stupid one, or the dingy one. And it's like, okay, so not only is someone with a facial difference bad, but they're stupid too. And
Yeah.
that, even with me, I have an incredible amount of tolerance for what Hollywood does and what the media does. And that one just jumped out at me, and I've always been resentful of it.
Mm-hmm. For me, I always use the example of the Lion King. Really, the difference between Mufasa and the bad guy, they're brothers, they look the same. Maybe I think there's a darker mane, which again, you can also delve into, but essentially Scar. That's what makes him bad. It's even in his name. And so that's a pretty blatant example.
Right. So one of the things now, when we were talking, you mentioned discrimination. I know that I was able to qualify in the state of Washington. I was looking to get a volunteer job that was only available to either ex-military or people with disabilities. Well, I never considered myself to have a disability, but I was able to qualify for the program because I had an appearance that might cause someone to discriminate against me. And that's how I got by. And I think the discrimination is the key word for someone with a physical difference.
Mm-hmm.
So could you mention, or could you elaborate on how does one recognize that they're being discriminated against?
Yeah, you know what? It is quite challenging. And I can also say that I've spoken with a lot of people who, you know, they'll share a story with me, whether it's, you know, losing a driver's license because they walked differently, or perhaps they weren't able to blow into a breathalyzer machine, or people who have had to leave a job because they're experiencing bullying at the workplace. A lot of people tend to, that's just part of life. That's just because it is. That's been part of their life experience. And, you know, they just go, well, you just got to keep moving. You just got to keep going. And I'll be there going in shock, like, that's not okay. It's not okay that you were treated that way. And so I have found a lot of times people kind of, it does take a bit of time to stop and realize, you know what, I wouldn't let somebody else, I wouldn't let my friend be treated that way. So why is it okay for me to be treated this way? And I think one of the big challenges is you know, a lot of discrimination happens on a daily basis, and people are just they're kind of used to it. That's just part of life. And, you know, also knowing that people with facial differences, we're not the only ones who have to deal with discrimination on a regular basis. So I think really recognizing it is the first step, which is challenging, to know actually, like, it's not okay for me to be treated differently. And again, I think one of the challenges too is that, you know, it's human nature to want to fit in or to pass. And so, you know, that is one thing, is in acknowledging, wait, you know, I guess I'm not passing. That right there can be quite challenging for people. And you know, you might not want to acknowledge. It's a lot easier to say, everything's going okay. This is a bit challenging, but it's not really going to slow me down, or, you know, this is just what life is. So I guess really being able to recognize and understand when people are labeling you, and a lot of times, like I said, it's not that people are doing it on purpose. I know I still find, you know, there are certain things, like when I talk about a marriage, you know, I generally picture a bride and a groom. I picture a heteronormative relationship. And realizing that, you know, sometimes, so in my language, I can even be guilty of discrimination, and I need someone to stop and say, do you realize that you just left out like a big portion of the population? So I think a big part is education and taking note, and it does take time, for sure. I know I'm still learning. I'm not sure if I actually answered your question.
Actually, that's fine. And there's a really good segue there into something else we can definitely talk about. But first of all, I want to say we do have a few live viewers on this show, and Charlene has typed in a question, which I'm going to ask, but I want to encourage anyone who is watching this live, or even anyone who's watching the replay, because the replay, there's going to ask questions, and those questions will come to me, and I will make sure that they get answered. Charlene asks, in Canada, is disfigurement considered a disability?
That's a great...
Yeah, just Canada. I know the UK does. I know they have laws that have passed against discrimination for physical disfigurements, but are there any in Canada?
So, okay, so I'm not a lawyer. I have not studied our human rights code extensively. I have reviewed it, and recently did visit our Museum of Human Rights out in Winnipeg. And I can say it's very much a gray area. You could maybe argue it, but you would almost have to kind of get it in under another kind of physical different kind of category. And so that is definitely one of our struggles. It's a gray area. It's not actually, I'm not protected. If I go for a job and I feel they turned it down because of my facial difference, there's really not a lot that I can do about it. I might be able to get some folks to fight the good fight, but from my understanding, it is a gray area, and it's not blatant. It's not. I personally don't feel that I am protected, to be quite honest. You know, and there might be some lawyers or some people with more legal expertise who are able to come back and say, well, you can kind of fit in there. But I'm going to say, kind of in my understanding and looking, that having a physical difference is kind of where it kind of slips through the cracks, to be quite honest. And there hasn't been, because a lot of times when you look at what creates change, for us in Canada in the Human Rights Code, it is that somebody needs to essentially go to court and fight for it. And I don't think that that has happened specifically for anyone in the facial difference community. But I don't know of a case, although if anybody else does, I would love to hear about it. And, you know, support and you know, create more awareness for sure. Great question.
Well, and I actually, one of the things that this kind of leads to, I mean, outside of legal channels, self-advocacy. And I wanted to give an example. Actually, it's job related even. I had a lovely conversation with Roland, who's one of the board members of the Mobius Syndrome Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about interviewing for jobs. And basically, he would just right up front, I have Mobius syndrome. This is what it does. This is how it affects my face and my appearance. And it was off the table. And of course, he wasn't legally obligated to do that. In fact, the legal system backs him not having to do that.
Exactly.
When you have a physical difference, sometimes it's better to just clear it. Just say, all right, this is the deal. This is what happened. We're done. Let's move on. You know, but I wanted to talk about self-advocacy because I know that that's something you had mentioned was important. So go ahead, tell me about self-advocacy.
All right. Well, I guess self-advocacy is kind of creating a space where you can express your experience. So I would say, yeah, you know what, in you know, a job interview, whether you bring it up, and that is somebody's choice. I'm going to say when you do have a facial difference, when you sit down in a room with somebody else, they're probably going to notice. And so for me, yeah, I will totally bring it up. For me also, though, my background is in social work. And so my experience in the facial difference community, it's very easy for me to segue it in because I'm able to bring in my other work experience. So I would say self-advocacy, I did kind of try to prepare this and was like, oh, that's kind of tricky. But essentially it is standing up for yourself. It is validating your own experience. For sure, letting people know. So, you know, if I am in a job interview, and I have been asked in a job interview, so is a facial difference a disability? And so being ready to answer that question and talk about my personal experience. And also I see self-advocacy as well as advocating for the community. You know, advocating, I'm not the only person with a facial difference. And so my self-advocacy also means that I am, you know, working to create awareness and education so that things are a little better for other folks in the community. And actually, sometimes I find that's almost easier because when I look at doing it, oh, if I'm just doing it for myself, that kind of seems a little selfish or narcissistic. But if I'm doing it for the greater good, if I'm doing it, I'm fine, but I'm doing it because I need to help somebody else, then it can make it a lot easier because it's saying like, you know, I'm okay, but like it makes it a lot easier to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do this on behalf of other folks in the community who don't have the opportunity to speak up in the same way that I am. So I see self-advocacy a little bit of being assertive about your needs, validating your own experience, as well as doing some education for other folks. Those are kind of personally some parts of advocacy for me.
Well, and you mentioned about not wanting to be narcissistic, but the reality of the situation is people, and I mean, there are a number of us. I could name 5 names off the top of my head, aside from you and I, of people just tremendously out there in the facial difference community. And basically what we do is live by example. We have confidence, we have acceptance. A lot of the people that I know are happily married and have been for some time. And yet we all have facial differences of varying degrees of severity. So what we prove is that it's possible for someone with a facial difference or a physical difference to be happy, to have a good, loving relationship, a decent job, and a fulfilling job. And those of us, I mean, some of us choose to go out there and speak. And this is actually a fantastic way to segue into talking about, ta-da, AboutFace.
All right, great.
Tell us how you got involved and what your current role is.
Sure. So I got involved with AboutFace when I was around 11. I wrote a poem about what it's like to have a facial difference and be 11, I suppose. And part of it was, part of the inspiration was from a VHS that my family had been sent from AboutFace. And then from there, really, it went to where I was able to volunteer, where I was able to speak. And again, I took it from I'm doing this to help other people, when really I benefited from it a great deal. And, whether it was to kind of volunteer at events, but also to meet other folks in the community. As we discussed earlier, I am really lucky, and I do have a really strong support system in my life. But there were still times when, I felt nobody else understood, and nobody else could understand what it was like to be me, and what it was like to feel that I always looked different than my peers. And so being involved in AboutFace gave me the opportunity to meet folks, to meet people with shared experiences. I can recall once I was scheduled for surgery, and then something happened. And so they were like, "Oh, Colleen can come in for surgery 2 months early. There's an opening." And so it was like, okay, I might have surgery tomorrow. And then it turns out the tools weren't available, or something happened. So it was like, "Oh, just kidding. You're actually not going to have surgery tomorrow. Everything, go back as you were." And I remember I cried. I just cried, and I didn't know whether I was upset because I wasn't having surgery, but I was also kind of scared, so I was relieved. And I remember meeting, another community member, Tanya, at an event. I think we were actually volunteering at a gala or something, so it was something completely unrelated, but I was able to say, "Yeah, you know what? I thought I was going to have surgery 2 days ago, and then I didn't, and I found it really upsetting, and I didn't know what was going on." And to have that conversation, to have like the validation of, she's like, "Oh yeah, I've kind of been in a similar situation, and yeah, it can be really scary preparing for surgery, and then to realize you don't have to." And for that was someone who I had met, maybe that was the second time I had met her, but to be able to have that camaraderie was actually really huge, and to meet other folks. So, I was lucky enough to stay involved in programming. I can actually recall the first phone call where we started talking about our current program, Camp Trailblazers, which is one of our biggest programs. And so I'm really quite lucky that I've been able to be a part of this and see people who came to our first camp. So that was over 10 years ago. And now they're able to come back as volunteers and as leaders. So that's a huge privilege to be able to see how people grow and learn, and kind of are then able to share their experience and knowledge with other folks. So my current role with AboutFace is technically it's manager of programs and client services. So the way I see that is really to be connected with the community, and to understand as best I can, but understand some of the needs, some of the challenges, some of the barriers that are out there in the community, and also offer resources and programs, such as we've got our monthly parent calls or individual calls, which are really just a conference call. They're just a group to talk to other people with shared experience, as well as education for healthcare professionals, for people who I guess I would consider allies to the facial difference community. So do education so that people can have best practice and have best treatment plans for their patients or clients that they're working with. And then a big part of what we do as well is our experiential programming. So that's our adult retreat. It's our Camp Trailblazers program, which is for kids who have a facial difference to come together and spend time together, as well as we've got our family camp version as well, which then welcomes people of all ages so that they can come together.
I'm going to jump in because Camp Trailblazers I definitely want to elaborate on that, and we've got some visuals to show. I do have well, first of all, I wanted to comment that the adult calls, the conference calls. I actually participate in a number of them. You don't have to be a member of,
No.
I don't know if AboutFace really, does it have like a paid membership even?
No, it's not. It's not paid. Essentially, what it is to sign up and become involved. It means that you go in our database and that we can let you know about programs and resources. We have a regular newsletter. We have events and that sort of thing. So that's really what it means. But yes, it is available for anyone who can call in or who can Skype in as well.
Yeah, and I know that there's a number of us in the United States.
Yeah.
Colleen has another question, and it's actually kind of related to her previous question. And basically, she's asking is there a council on disability or an agency in Canada that interfaces with government to advocate on behalf of individuals with disability or disfiguring conditions? Or is that something that varies from province to province?
Oh, these are fantastic, fantastic questions.
Are you like changing, in other words?
For sure. And I would say not that I'm completely aware of, I would say in smaller pockets. So, for example, I was able to meet at Government House to meet with. So in Canada, we've got the Governor General, who, this can get quite confusing for Americans and even some Canadians, I think, who is technically the representative of the Queen, even though the Queen doesn't really have any power in Canada anymore, but still it's one of those things that we have. So we did have a meeting with their partners and kind of discussing it, but I would say as far as, so there have been individual opportunities when we have been able to sit down and speak with people like her honor and her excellency and that sort of thing, or maybe members of parliament as well. And we have had, so we did have, September is, for us, it's National Facial Difference Awareness Month. So we have had that addressed kind of on the floor in Parliament, but I would say that is still something that, I know AboutFace, it's definitely something that is on our radar and we are working on it. So, we did have that opportunity last year, which was fantastic, and we're hoping to build on that. And, there's lots of changes in Canada with our government right now, so who knows what opportunities will be available. But we don't have one distinct group. AboutFace would kind of love to be that group that is able to kind of take that charge, and really one of the things is to have something, to have an action plan, to have a call to action to bring to folks is also quite important. And again, like I said, Canada is a large country, so there might be things happening that I'm not aware of as well.
Okay, I have one more question before we move on and talk a little more in depth about programs like Camp Trailblazers, and that is, I noticed on the website the AboutFace celebrity representative is the lead singer of Kiss.
Yes.
Could you I can't think of his name.
Paul Stanley.
Yeah. Could you explain how that happened?
Sure. So actually, so yes, Paul Stanley. So for a long time, one of the musicals in Toronto was Phantom of the Opera. And so that was one thing. It's actually coming back for a little while, I believe. But that was kind of a musical. That wasn't in my bios, but I have a huge appreciation for musicals. But that was something that, it was a common story. Everybody kind of, school trips went to Phantom of the Opera, that sort of thing. And I know for me, I grew up listening to the soundtrack, and it took me a while until I kind of went, wait, hold up, Phantom of the Opera, he has a mask, he lives under, and I kind of realized, oh, Phantom of the Opera has a facial difference. Another example of, people didn't really like him. People didn't really understand. And so Paul Stanley was actually, he played the Phantom for a while in Toronto. So AboutFace outreached him to say, would you be interested in doing any work with us? And it turns out that Paul Stanley himself also, he has a facial difference, which he has started speaking about a lot more, and I know is included in his most recent book. So he has, I think it's okay to speak on his behalf. He's part of our school program, which is called Facing Differences, and he doesn't really discuss it there, but you can tell that over time he's become much more comfortable, and he speaks about it in his book. So he has microtia, which means that his ear is not fully formed. But you know, one of the beauties of having rock star hair is not many people know it's not really that noticeable. But I will say we do have a fantastic photo of one of our young community members. We got to go to a concert, and so she was ready to go, look at I'm the same. And so there's a quick little photo of the two of them kind of, I guess, celebrating their common difference, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wondered if he had a facial difference, or if he was just, I mean, he had to, I figured there had to be a connection somewhere.
Yeah.
So, Camp Trailblazers. Now,
Yes.
I'll grab a couple of visuals that you sent me to share. So just talk about, you kind of touched on it already, but I know that's a program that's very near and dear to your heart. So let's talk about what it does.
For sure. So Camp Trailblazers is, so I'm going to say now it's kind of evolved. So traditional Camp Trailblazers is for campers from 10 to 18 who have a facial difference themselves. And essentially, so first of all, camp itself is a great opportunity for young people to develop skills, to develop problem-solving skills, socializations, to challenge themselves. It's a great tool for people to build resiliency. And so kind of resiliency means, essentially it means, you know, to keep trying, because, you know, people, I wish that I could say I'm successful at everything I try in life, but a lot of times it takes a couple tries for me to succeed. So actually being able to continue trying, to continue pushing yourself, to get out of your comfort zone is actually a huge life skill, and camp is really important for developing that skill in young people and in people of all ages as well. So right there, camp is very important. And then Camp Trailblazers, it gives kids the opportunity to meet others, to meet peers. For some kids, it's the first time that they've ever met anybody else with a facial difference as well. So, you know, and as I said, you know, I grew up in a small, supportive, small town, but also, you know, I didn't think anybody else had a facial difference. Didn't think anybody else could understand what I was going through. So to be able to meet peers who have that shared experience, whether it's going through surgery, going through the hospital, whether it is, yeah, some of my campers get bullied, whether it's dealing with even making new friends. A big thing that we always make a point of talking about is answering the question, why do you look different? Or quite honestly, it's more commonly, what's wrong with your face? And so talking about, I'm a big believer in practice, or kind of in cognitive behavior therapy. So that the way I see it is that the more that you practice something, the easier that it gets. So if we're able to go around the circle at camp and practice explaining, you know, this is my facial difference, then that means, you know what? People might not be asked that for a couple weeks, for a couple months, but that means they've got something kind of in their back pocket that's prepared, and it does get easier and easier over time. Even just kind of talking about the language, you know, I prefer the term facial difference. I don't like thinking about myself as someone who's disformed or disfigured. You know, even saying that kind of makes me frown, and I don't want that to be a representation of who I am. So talking about the language of having a facial difference, and also validating experience as well. So dealing with being stared at. And I know that a lot of folks in the community, campers and older, have people go, well, yeah, but what's the big deal? Yeah, but just get over it. That doesn't really matter. You know what? You're being hypersensitive. So being able for people to go, yeah, you know what? Yeah. When I go out shopping, or when I go out with my friends, yeah, people do a second take, and that sort of thing is really important. And so Camp Trailblazers, you know, it's not that we sit around in a sharing circle the whole time talking about what it is to look different. We still go swimming. We still go on the rock wall, the high ropes course, out in the canoe, you know, learn life skills and arts and crafts. We still do all of those things as well, but also have the opportunity to have those conversations. And we do tie-dye. Those are, so Don's holding up one of our camp shirts, which is also actually really fun. I enjoy tie-dyeing. So it is an opportunity to connect with others. And a lot of folks, a lot of campers build those relationships. And, you know, they'll be in touch because some of them, they still live hours away. So they have that support network that's there outside of camp, but also knowing that they're not alone is really important.
Kathy just brought up, she said she wanted you to make sure that you talked about the adult retreat in relation to the importance of networking, and for those who might not have previously had the community experience of something like AboutFace, and how important that is for adults to see. I know that when I was growing up, I didn't have a Camp Trailblazers. I didn't have
For sure.
I didn't have Facebook. I had no connection. I was pretty much on my own. And so, I mean, discovering the whole facial difference community has just been huge for me. I don't know if it changed me or if I had already pretty much come to myself by that time, but it's still certainly an affirming experience. And it's just so nice to know that there's so many other people out there that are basically in the same space as I am, as well as being able to help people who aren't quite there yet.
For sure. And I think also recognizing that in our community, we, the people in the community members, are huge resources, right? Whether it's supporting each other or teaching each other, sharing experiences. Also even, you know, people who do webinars, people who do speaking, people who do research. There's a lot of valuable resource within the community. So that's really great. And yes, that's the thing, you know, when our campers grow up, we still grow up to be adults with facial differences. And, you know, once you turn 18, those challenges in life don't go away. It might change. It might be more subtle. Adults are much less likely. That was poor English. I hope my mom doesn't watch this. But adults are less likely to blatantly say, you know, what's wrong with your face? But adults are still going to stare, maybe not stare, but they'll make eye contact and they'll look away, the eye flicker. You know, like we said, if something makes people feel uncomfortable, then they might just avoid it. So then that turns into that interpersonal aggression and that sort of thing of just avoiding, which, you know, then means folks are left out and that sort of thing. So, you know, there's not a magical, you know, once you turn 18, oh, everyone is perfect and fine. You know, everybody's, you know, struggles are resolved. And so I think, yes, that is really important to acknowledge that, you know, we are supportive and people do deserve support throughout their life. I think also one thing that I always try to talk about is, you know, things like our self-esteem and sense of worth and body image and all those sort of things. I really see them as fluid. So that means there are the good days and then the not so good days. And that's okay. I used to think when I was a teenager and I was starting to get involved with AboutFace, I thought, you know what? My options are either to sit home alone in the dark, isolated and depressed, and that was not appealing to me, or else I have to be like loud and proud and I have a facial difference, but I don't care what anybody else thinks. When the reality is, of course I care what other people think. Of course I want people to like me. I want people to think I'm attractive as well. But recognizing that, you know, you've got your good days and then you can have your not so good days. And that's okay. And that's also completely normal. And that's really important. I think it's really important for people to recognize that within themselves and give themselves some patience and give each other some patience as well.
Now, I wanted to talk about diverse communities, and one of the ways to do that, I think, is to bring up your involvement in roller derby.
Sure.
How you got involved in that?
Essentially, it was something that I was interested in for a long time, and a friend's sibling played it, and it's a pretty cool. It is one of the. There's lots of things that I really like about it, and it definitely, I feel it is a feminist sport, and I feel that it is a very diverse sport. It is. There's people who look different for sure, whether it's even just in fashion, tattoos, all sorts of differences, and also different lifestyle as well. There's people from all across the community, which I really, really like. And so it is a place where, I think diversity, in my opinion, is quite celebrated. And it is embraced, and that's kind of one of the draws of coming to roller derby, is that you're going to see people playing, you're going to see women playing a sport, and other folks who are also involved in the community, and of varying shapes, sizes. That's one thing I love about the sport, is that having a different body types, all of those have different advantages. So I'm a taller, bigger girl, as my mom said when she saw one of my games, was like, oh, so like your butt is a good asset. But then also being smaller means that, you can kind of get around a little more, you can be a little faster. And so that's one thing that I really like, is that everybody can bring their own strength to that sport, and everyone can bring into the community. It is, most of the leagues were self-run. By athletes. So we've got people who can do PR, and people who can do marketing, people who can do policy, finance, and all of that, all of those different kind of avenues. And we're really coming together and collaborating. Plus it's a lot of fun. It's just a lot of fun.
Now, what about the spectacle aspect? I mean, are you at all concerned about the voyeuristic aspect of spectators coming to see all these people that have some very interesting differences?
Yeah, and I guess that's something I would say, that roller derby is constantly evolving. And so I would say, at least for my league, there is less fishnets than there used to be. And it is kind of really working towards, like, we're athletes, and I mean, I'm on a home team, but some of my league mates are much more serious, much more competitive and committed to the sport. And so pardon?
You said fishnet. Could you explain that?
Oh, sorry, like fishnet tights.
Oh,
Sorry, and
but I didn't know if that was describing a certain type of personality or dress, or that was
for sure. And so really there is a drive to be taken seriously as athletes, because the people in the track, they are strong, they are powerful, they are athletic, have a lot of skill and work really hard, and the sport is always evolving and always changing. And so I would say, that is kind of a struggle from going back, where people would compare it to, like, the WWF and that sort of thing. Like, when I tell people I do it, oh, so like, do you hit each other with chairs? No, because I would get kicked out of the game for that. And also, it's a very, I play against my league mates, I play against a lot of my friends. And so yes, saying that was a really great hit, that knocked the wind out of me, or like, look what you did to me, look at this bruise, that is still a compliment. But it's a regulated sport, and we have lots of great officials, for sure, because it is, we are a sport as well. But we are kind of, right now, there is kind of, you're caught between having that spectacle as well, but also kind of recognizing now of taking it seriously and respecting it as the sport. But one thing I didn't mention, one of the reasons I also love is that the sport is that it really does promote positive body image. And I can say, before I started, I never really wore booty shorts. I was not that comfortable, whereas now it's just comfortable. And now, instead of feeling self-conscious that my thighs are kind of big, I go, look at these thighs are massive and they can push other people out of the way, and kind of celebrate the parts that I wasn't that proud of before.
Yeah, and but it's not like wrestling where it's all fake. You guys really are pushing each other, and
Yeah,
there's definitely the physical contact is real.
for sure. For sure. And there's some tournaments coming up online. So I encourage everyone to check out their local Derby League, because it is really a great supportive and welcoming community for sure.
Okay, I have another question from Charlene, and that kind of ties back to we were talking about the adult retreats and whatnot. And Charlene was interested in the percentage of resources that are allocated to programs that are adult focused, because she's pointing out that everybody seems to understand that kids need the support, that kids need help, but adults are overlooked, both here and internationally. So how's Canada deal with that balance between making sure that we're supporting adults and kids equally?
For sure. I think that is a really great point, and I think also kind of the reality is, AboutFace, we are not government funded, and we rely on funds really from foundations, grants, and private donations. So there is one aspect, there is that aspect as well, is like, yeah, people are interested in supporting children, and yeah, adults, you're right, adults are a tough sell, because people kind of think, oh, well, you're an adult now, you're good, you're sorted, you should have everything figured out by the time you make it to be an adult. So that is a struggle. I will say AboutFace, that is one of the things. Camp Trailblazers, was a success, and so I'll give credit. Randy, who had my job before me, was like, well, yeah, but like, what about the adults as well? And that's kind of where the adult retreat kind of came out of there as well, is what happens when our campers kind of graduate, or all these other people, like Don and myself, who didn't have Camp Trailblazers when we were younger, and having those opportunities. Plus as well, Don has attended our family camp on the West Coast. And also I think that's a great way of role modeling, whether it's for parents of younger kids, that, you know what, yeah, things are gonna be okay. But also for kids to see, oh, okay, I have potential for all of those great things to happen in my life, and that sort of thing. So yes, I will agree that supporting children can be kind of more noticeable and more visual, but definitely in AboutFace, we are committed to supporting people of all ages, because it is clear that support is necessary. But yeah, I would say I would recognize, I do have better connections with the pediatric clinics across Canada, saying, hey, about Camp Trailblazers, let your patients, let your families know. And because clinics are very different for adults, they can be quite varied. It is a little harder to get in there. And also I think that recognizing the challenges for folks who have an acquired difference, or even have a congenital difference, but they've had it for 40 years. They should have it figured out by now, I guess, might be part of the thought. But for acquired as well, is that I think supporting kind of the emotional and the mental health is less tangible, and it is more challenging to make it a priority as well, when there's dealing with the surgery, there's dealing with if it's oral cancer, if it's an accident, if there's trauma, all of those sorts of things. I would say it is very challenging to make the case for the other aspects of health to be included in the treatment plan. And that's definitely something that we're still working on as well. And, also that some healthcare professionals are working. I got a call from a surgeon the other day of saying, what can I do to support my patients? So, it's getting better, but definitely a lot of work to be done.
Well, I want to, we're getting to the point where I need to wrap the show up, but I wanted to kind of give my testimonial for Camp Trailblazers. Yes, I went to the family camp, but I can tell you, I mean, there was a contingency of adults there too, and we had our own little meetings as well as meetings with the kids. but I can tell you, I will testify that the adults had at least as much fun as the kids did. We would kind of suck up that youthful energy, but we were doing a lot of the same activities and then some. And so, and there was enough of us that it wasn't just, a few of us and then a whole bunch of kids. Actually, it was probably pretty well split when I went to.
Yeah, our West Coast camp for sure is very well split, and I appreciate. And there is kind of a movement of people recognizing that adults need camp as well and can benefit from all of those activities as well. There is a movement. It is becoming more trendy for sure. And so, yeah, that's just a way. One thing that AboutFace works really hard to do is recognizing the needs of the community and what can we do to adapt our current programs and resources to meet that. So that was one thing where I was like, I can't, I'm not able to do an adult retreat in BC, but that was a way that we were able to kind of keep the camp trailblazers and also bring adults in the area in, which has been really fantastic.
So one thing as we close the show, first of all, if I haven't said it already, I want to say it again. Thank you, Colleen, so much for taking your time to being on the show with me. I really try to get a diverse group of guests that have different and unique things to say. And of course, to help represent the different foundations and organizations like AboutFace. One of the things that I always ask my guests is, as we've discussed, not everybody is in the same place in terms of confidence, self-esteem. What is one action item, one piece of advice that you would have for somebody today that can help them start moving their life forward in a positive direction?
Yeah, that's a fairly loaded question. I'll do my best. I think what I would encourage people to do is to recognize the importance of self-care. I think that we're taught, we understand that our physical body needs nutrition, needs food, needs sleep, needs exercise, needs all of these things. And so, I think it's a lot easier for us to meet those needs because we've been taught. And, I believe in kind of treating a person as a whole. So there are other areas of ourself and of our health, such as our emotional health, our mental health, our spiritual health. And I think because they're not visual necessarily, it's a little trickier to recognize and to put the same effort into taking care of those aspects of yourself. So in the same way, if you're going to, get a good 8 hours of sleep, or that's your goal, or you're going to eat your fruits and vegetables or go to the gym, then I think take that time to nurture your emotional health as well. One thing I kind of realized over time when, I was a teenager and I was facilitating groups on body image and that sort of thing, is I realized, it had a positive effect on me. It helped me feel better about my body. And as I said, that's one of the reasons I play roller derby. It helps me feel good about myself and my body. It helps me deal with kind of, sometimes some stress in your life, whether it's to go and, go to the gym and deal with that, or hit some people. Sometimes that's fun. But take care of yourself. So I know it sounds silly where we understand, okay, if I want to be better at basketball, I know that I need to practice my dribbling and practice layups. But if people go, okay, I would really like to feel better about myself, I would really like to improve my self-esteem, that, there are those things. Okay, what can you do to improve your self-esteem? So, I mean, for me, it's having positive pictures, having photos where I'm like, yeah, you know what? I think I look good. Having positive memories, having things that make you feel good about yourself and your accomplishments and celebrating those. So, and it can take practice, whether it is practicing looking in the mirror. You're going to feel foolish or silly the first few times looking in the mirror and saying, you know what, like, I look good today, or I feel good, I'm a good person. And recognizing, and practicing that. You're going to feel silly at first, but by the end, you actually kind of start to believe it. And in the same way, taking care of yourself. If my body starts getting run down, if I get a cough, or if I've got a cut, on my hand, I'm going to go to the doctor and I'm going to get some help to take care of it. And so if I'm not feeling good, if I'm really struggling with how I'm feeling, if I'm struggling with emotional, mental health and all that sort of thing, recognizing, yeah, you know what, one of the bravest, one of the like most courageous things you can do is go and ask for help and go get help, whether it's from a friend, an ally, or a professional. I think it's really important to give ourselves, kind of our inner self, the same attention and the same commitment that we give our physical self as well, which I think it can take a lot of work, and it can take a lot of practice, but like everything else that you practice, it gets a lot easier, and you get better at it over time.
Yeah, and one of the things you can do is go to the AboutFace website. I mean, or you can get in touch with Colleen, and
For sure.
the adult calls or the family calls or some of the conference calls can be really helpful. And when you get to talk to other people that are different, I think it's really important for people to realize that they're not alone. They don't have to deal with these issues alone. We talk about some pretty crazy and interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it is, it is like doing this, having this opportunity to speak on this webinar, right? It's an exciting opportunity for myself and for AboutFace, right? Like I feel good after talking, and after our conference calls that we do as well. I feel good. That's part of my self-care. That's what I do to take care of those other aspects of health, for sure.
all right. Well, thank you very, very much, Colleen. This was valuable information, and I'm sure that the people who are watching this, both live and in the recording, are going to get a lot out of it. And I really appreciate people that my guests. I just have some of the most amazing guests. I mean, that's part of my self-care, is getting to talk to all these wonderful people. And they don't all have facial differences, but it's across the community. So my next webinar is going to be the last webinar of the year. I'm going to take a little break before I start back up in January. And my next webinar is going to be on Tuesday, November 10th, and it's going to be a little earlier. It's going to be at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, and that translates to 1:30 Eastern. And my guest is going to be Charlene Pell. Charlene is the founder of Facing Forward, and she has also created a workshop that she calls What to Do When People Stare. And the title of our webinar is going to be Why People Stare, Using Social Interactions. So join us. Again, I'm trying to kind of maybe get a little bit different spins rather than just talking about people's stories and their situations. Like we talked today about discrimination, we're going to talk specifically about the science of staring. I think it's going to be interesting to me. So I hope you'll join me. And always remember, don't just, yes, be kind to other people. Think about how you would like to be treated and be kind to other people. And don't forget, like Colleen was mentioning, don't forget to be kind to yourself. So thank you very much for joining me, and hopefully I will see you, or you will see me, in future webinars.
We are love, we are one. We are how we treat each other when the day is done. We are peace, we are war. We are how we treat each other, nothing more. We are how we treat each other, nothing more. We are how we treat each other.
I'm just going to share my last screen because I want to. There we go. I'm just going to let it sit there even though the music ended, because I did great for Colleen's pictures, and now all of a sudden decides to fail. Okay, now I've got to get back and end the show.